Thanks. So yeah, I'm James. I'm an iOS developer. Have been for quite a while. Got started a year before Swift was announced, so it's been about sort of 10 years, but I've been working for 6. And yeah, I make apps on my iPad. It's just sort of been the last year or so that I've really managed to move my whole sort of personal hobby project development workflow over. But yeah, I'm going to talk about how I do that, why I do that, and so this Keynote as well. I've made this on my iPad using Keynote and got a bit of a surprise reaction there. So yeah, but yeah, I've got this far and doing the slideshow now live from my iPad. So yeah, I'm going to talk a bit about how I'm doing all that. So I'm going to start with clearing up some assumptions about what the iPad can do. So don't you need a Mac for? Let's take a look at a few things. Freeform windows, the iPad got that recently with Stage Manager. The Mac got that too, and it's a bit of a different thing on the Mac, where everyone kind of hates it because they're used to freeform windowing. But on the iPad, it's unlocked that and the ability to use external displays as a second monitor as well. So yeah, I usually use my iPad hooked up to a display with a Bluetooth mouse and keyboard, kind of as a desktop computer. So yeah, it's also got some more advanced things, command menus. So on the Mac, you've got the menu bar. You can actually hit Command ? And you can search the menu bar as well, which is pretty handy. And yeah, so the menu bar, we're probably familiar with it as developers, most of us, but yeah, it's got keyboard shortcuts in there and also sort of further actions for the app. The iPad kind of has similar here. We've got the ability to search if you do Command ? And this is what it looks like normally. So you can see you've kind of got like the similar sorts of menus as you would have on a Mac: File, Edit, View, and it shows keyboard shortcuts next to them. This is kind of an overlay that you get when you hold down Command, and it just shows keyboard shortcuts, but you can see they're sort of trying to add some parity there. And of course, it's not a keyboard first device, so usually you don't really want to see this sort of thing, so it's an overlay here. Got a few other things. If you want to do command line, then on the Mac, of course, you've got terminal built in. On the iPad, you've not got anything built in, but you can get third-party apps that let you do some of that stuff. So A Shell is one that I use, which runs code in WebAssembly. So you can run different commands and things. It's got access to the its own sandbox, and you can give it access to anywhere in your file system using a special command that opens the native file picker. So yeah, so you can kind of do quite a bit there. I think you can cross-compile commands to WebAssembly as well, but I've not really dived into any of that. A few more things. Git clients, so I prefer to work sort of visually with Git. You can do that in the command line as well, but I use working copy on the iPad. There's not a whole lot of choices on the iPad compared to on a Mac where I use Fork. But working copy is definitely the one with the best sort of integrations at the moment, and it's got a specific way of importing Playgrounds projects, which we'll see in a minute. You can also go as far as doing things like testing API requests, got a HTTP bot. You can also just use Postman directly, because you can see there it's usable in a web browser. And network proxy, and if you want to get really technical, there's all this sort of thing you can do intercepting web requests to pretend you get a different response from a server for testing your apps. You can actually just get some of these apps directly on both, which kind of surprised me. So, and then, yeah, Apple's also making their own Pro apps for the iPad now. So Logic Pro, Final Cut Pro were announced sort of last year, and they've been pretty good so far. And of course, you can publish apps. So I've published this one recently. It's called Medlead, which is short for Media Library and Editor. And it's one that I was just kind of missing iTunes, and the music app on iPad and iPhone doesn't let you actually do the sort of traditional syncing and metadata editing that you can on the Mac. So I just made my own. And this has had about 7 updates now, and I've published all of these through Playgrounds. I've not touched a Mac for any of the code side of things. The only thing I have done is those screenshots there. I did take them with the Mac simulator because on iPad it can be a bit tricky to get a pixel perfect size, and the App Store Connect is very picky about the size of those screenshots. So but that is literally the only thing that I need a Mac for, and you might be able to get away without. So why iPad? So to answer that, we have to sort of ask, what is an iPad to me? So we've got two laptops here. One of them's an iPad, one of them is not. And if you're just an average person, you've never used any Apple product before, what you're going to think when you compare these two things? Firstly, the screen doesn't work on a Mac. So you touch the screen, nothing happens. Why is that? It's any Windows laptop can do that. Apple just doesn't. Yeah. The keyboard's stuck on. So you can't just take that off. You can't just use it like a tablet. Again, like Windows laptops, they can all just kind of do this sort of thing. You get so many convertibles and things. So yeah, again, why is that? Why can't we just have some nice stuff on the Mac there? Whereas on the iPad, you can draw on it with the Apple Pencil if you want to use it like a notepad. And then also, it runs all of my apps. So the iPad, you can watch like things on streaming services. You can use banking apps. You can even get shopping apps and that sort of thing if you want to do your shopping. There's just like all sorts of companies are releasing apps for iOS, but they're not releasing them for Mac. So you've actually got quite a range of just normal everyday apps that you just can't get on the Mac. So I kind of see it as the iPad's kind of a new generation of computer. So the iPad's been around for 15 years now, or iOS as a whole, versus 40 years for macOS, roughly here. And in that time, they've also had quite different priorities. So macOS was kind of designed in the early days of computers. It's not any sort of focus on security there, for one thing. The iPad has been around and it's had introduced the Apple Pencil for using it like a notebook. They've also, of course, this last year had AI as one big focus, which has taken resources away from other things. And of course, the Mac already exists, so the iPad doesn't necessarily need to do all of these things. So they're not getting pressure for filling everyone's sort of niche workflows necessarily. And of course, the App Store as well. So the iPad's always kind of been a bit of a money driver for Apple with the App Store, and they don't really want to give that up, although we'll see whether that stays the case as the government sort of step in around the world. But yeah, so back to that first point with security. The iPad was kind of designed as quite a secure computer. So with iOS, they kind of wanted to fix some of the problems that they'd had with the Mac. They didn't want an app store at all in the first place. They wanted to just do it with web apps, but they introduced the App Store, and then they tried to make it all locked down, but just sort of poke holes in that security model. And so that means when I'm using my iPad, I don't really have to worry about unexpected background processes going crazy. I don't have to worry about leftovers from apps that I install, and so I end up just installing more apps, and just enjoying it a bit more. For things only the iPad can do, it's a really modular computer, so I'm using it as a tablet, as a laptop right now, but you can also just use it as a tablet. You can use it as a desktop computer like I do at home. You can also just use it as a notepad. So sometimes I go for Japanese lessons and get out my Apple Pencil and just write in notes, and that can be a bit better than trying to fiddle with keyboards and change language modes all the time. So there's all sorts of ways you can use it that you just couldn't do on a Mac. And it's just a really nice computer. Like, it's got all of these modern sorts of things. Don't have to worry about windowing unless I actually need it, whereas on a Mac you've always kind of got to deal with that. There's no just way to just turn that off. Don't have to worry about critting apps, because I mean, if you're designing a computing experience these days, like, why do you need to always quit apps? It's a bit silly. It's not anything that benefits the human really, it's just something that the computer could do itself, but macOS was designed without those assumptions. It's got touchscreen support, of course, and it's got some really nice screens built in, which trickle down to the Mac, but start with the iPad, and also starting with the iPad this year, we had the M4 chip. So it's even kind of on parity in terms of power. But back to what we're here for, Swift Playgrounds. So we want to answer, what is it? How do I use it? How do I use it productively? And do I need a Mac? So what is Swift Playgrounds? It's that icon there. Done. But no, let's go into a bit more detail. So it was originally introduced as a learning tool across macOS and iPadOS. And it, in December 2021, was updated with quite a major update, for me at least, with Swift Package Manager based apps. So you can actually build an app in Swift Playgrounds now. And this is cross-compatible with Xcode as well. So you can use Xcode to edit these projects. They're kind of like, yeah, they're based on Swift Package Manager. So you've got a package.swift in there, but not all of the capabilities of a great big old Xcode project. So diving into how you use it and how you use it productively, let's look at these things here. So we've got previews and running the app, app settings, including uploading to App Store Connect, the editor and commands, extensions, and also doing a bit of hacking with the package.swift to see if we can get any extra functionality out of it. So let's start from the place that we usually start, the home screen. So this is my home screen, and you can see I've got a great big files widget on there, which has links to all of the projects that I'm currently working on. And this is quite a nice way to sort of have them staring at me in the face to make sure I do some productive work sometimes. And this is backed by a folder on the file system, so it's not like your files have to live on the desktop, like another computing platform. So I quite like that. You can also get widgets for your Git client and App Store Connect backed graph widgets and things. So if you want to see your sales, you can also sort of see that on there. But yeah, so let's dive into the actual app itself. So here you can see in the center we've got your projects. Mine actually live in a folder on my file system, so I don't tend to keep them in the app. But on the bottom we've got the options for creating an app and some tutorials for learning to code, which some of them use the old system, some of them are teaching you how to make apps, and so they use the new format. If you want to open something from the file system, then you can go in here and do browse, and then you can browse the whole file system. I've seen in one of the WWDC presentations for the new sort of document file picker, they actually use Playgrounds as an example, but that update is not shipped yet. And then you can also go into this menu and do new app. So let's open up a new app here. And let's bump up the font size so you can actually see it. So there we go. So let's take a look at previews to start with. So if we go in here, so we've got content view here. Let's update that and let's introduce a preview. So you can see on the right, we've actually already got a preview there. That is the app preview. That is the entire app running automatically, which is one of those things that Xcode can't really do. And you can see here we've got our preview now, and that has some mock data injected in there. So yeah, so some similarities to Xcode there, and some things that it doesn't do. Although if you actually open one of these Swift Package Manager projects in Xcode, you do get a whole app live preview, which is interesting when you compare that to a standard Xcode project. You also have support for running the app. So if you want to fully run the app, which kind of is the same but with a resizable window there, you can do this. You have a window there for managing and debugging the app. And you've got this sort of overlay thing for getting your console. So you can see what you've printed out. If we go back into that debugger, so you've got a few options there. The Show Playgrounds one actually brings the editor window to the foreground, and got a few sort of options there for restarting and stopping. And when you're not using that, that disappears into the status bar up at the top, which I think is quite a handy sort of way to do it. Kind of using the status bar there like a menu bar. I wonder whether other apps will get access to do that sort of thing.
James, can I just ask,
yeah.
Is it just Swift UI apps that Swift Playgrounds does?
No, so you can actually build UIKit apps in there as well. Okay. You can make use of UIKit. I did have a try changing out the sort of top level thing, the app protocol, for a app delegate directly, but I didn't have much luck with that. I'm not sure whether it's because doing an app delegate through code, I'm not that handy at it. But you can still use Swift UI and have an app delegate alongside it, so not too much of a concern there. Yeah. So yeah. So you get this preview window. It lets you test most of what you want your app to do. Doesn't support multi-window because it's technically running within Playgrounds, but we can go a step further with that. So let's take a look at the app settings panel, which does actually have one window for running the app properly. So it's at the top left of the editor here. If we open it up, you can see we can edit our project metadata here. So we've got things like the accent color, and there's actually, it generates an icon for you, so you can just sort of save the effort when you're starting out and have a nice identifiable icon, but you can then import your own as well. You can set the name there, you can set the minimum deployment target, which goes right back to iOS 15 when this was first introduced. That is making apps in Playgrounds. If we scroll down here, we've got capabilities, so you can add capabilities for app system integration. All things you'd expect from Xcode here, signing and version number. Notably, there's not a build number, and that's because Playgrounds manages that for you automatically, so you don't have to bump that up every time. And that's a handy thing that would be quite nice if it came to Xcode as well, really. But yeah, and then finally at the bottom there, we have the Upload to App Store Connect button. So this is how you can take that app and actually get it onto App Store Connect. And if that's not registered in App Store Connect, it gives you a little form for filling out exactly what you need to do that. So you can do that straight from Playgrounds. So this way you can actually upload to App Store Connect and have that go straight to test flight. So you can try out your app, not quite as quick as Xcode, not in seconds, but in minutes. So it's definitely doable. And this is probably a security model thing that they don't want you installing apps directly. But if it goes through test flight, it's all good by Apple standards. So onto the editor itself, we've got a few commands. We've got the toolbar at the top that you can edit in the sort of iPad fashion. So you can drag in things like the quick actions, open quickly. So these are things you can get to via shortcuts as well on the keyboard. I tend to customize it like this, so I have views, modifiers and symbols there, but I skip out on the colors. And finally, you can also add documentation up there. So you've got all these things that are available in Xcode as well, some of them behind a plus button, and you've not really got any way of customizing the toolbar in Xcode. So I quite like this sort of approach. So to go through them quickly, we've got quick actions here, which looks just like it does in Xcode, including listing all the shortcuts. And yeah, quite a lot of the actions you'd sort of recognize from Xcode. And there is actually, you can of course still use the holding down command, and you can get up shortcuts that way. So yeah, if you want to do sort of a similar thing for any app on iPadOS, then you can still get that up. We've also got open quickly, where it's much the same way it does in Xcode. We've got the documentation, which comes up in its own window, which is quite handy. So you can see documentation of the quality you would get in Xcode, which often isn't much, right there in a separate window. And if you also run the app, you can see it tends to get quite busy. So you start to see why you might want an external display hooked up. So the editor, if you want to import assets, you can do that. So we've got files here, dragging in an image. And this actually creates a asset catalog behind the scenes, but the editor just displays it as sort of a flat list of images. And that also means that you can't get some of the nice things you get with asset catalogs like dark mode images. Some limitations there, but nothing that would stop you from shipping an app if you wanted to. If we insert that all in, you can see it's running the previews. If we were to do that wrong, then we would get inline errors just like Xcode. We've got a file menu up at the top where we can import sort of files and folders. We can insert files and folders into the project. We can import assets, and we can also add third-party Swift packages if you want to make use of existing libraries. For the project navigator, let's see a bit of live coding in action. So we can create a folder there. We can make a new file in it with a right click. If we type in view, you can see the autocomplete is also the same as in Xcode. So you can instantly have your view there. Can select the content that we want in that view, cut it, and paste it in the other view. Then we get the inline error there, so we can copy over our state that we want. And yeah, if we insert the new view in there, we copy over the mock data for the preview, and then what you'll see is the app instantly rebuilds and we have our app running again. So you don't even need to sort of relaunch on the simulator or anything like that. Your app is just there, all running. And so let's rename this. Can't call it navigation view because Apple's used that one. So navigation container it is. Now, might be a good point to mention, Playgrounds does let you search the project and you can do a find and replace. Doesn't have refactoring, but I'm not sure anyone who's used Xcode really is going to miss that, given the length of time it takes to do a refactor sometimes. But yeah, so there we go, we've done it. Yeah, so you can also import Swift packages. So I've imported one of my own packages here, and that's actually one that I've made in Playgrounds, which we'll see in a minute. You're not meant to be able to do that. So extensions, so let's extend Playgrounds. Now, Playgrounds doesn't have extensions by default. It doesn't have extensions like Xcode does, where you can actually hook up an app to Xcode and select some text and it can do stuff with it. But we can get pretty close. So if I've got my model type here, it's complaining it's got no initializers because it's an observable. So I can actually just sort of make an initializer for this. Does anyone have any ideas how I might do that? No? So I'm going to select that text. What I'm going to do is bring up Siri. Now this is not my, Apple Intelligence, I'll tell you that. So doing it again, I'm actually copying this text. I'm bringing up Siri and I'm typing something in, and this is a shorthand name for a shortcut. So that shortcut is taking the clipboard and it's generating an initializer through some quite hefty regex there. So regular expressions, it's generating that initializer for me and putting that back on the clipboard so I can just paste and have that in there. And I've also generated a QR code also through shortcuts, so you can take that if you want to. But I'm not sure I'm going to leave it up long enough, so you can see me after if you want that. Yeah, we've also got text replacement. If you want something a bit simpler, there is text replacement built in too. It's on macOS and iPadOS, so you can just put in a misspelling of string, and if you want that to correct a string, then you can see that that just kind of works in here. So yeah, there we go. It does text replacement too. You can also have multiple windows if you want to drop files between different projects, and if you want to open that up in Xcode, we can see there we've got the same project in Xcode, and in glorious Xcode fashion you have to actually click on that little reload button to get the preview going, because Xcode. Yeah, so now more interesting stuff, adding Git. So with working copy, you can go into this menu here and you can add a document package such as Codia or Swift Playground. So it's actually designed specifically for importing Swift Playgrounds here. And once you import them, you can actually go in and you can push, pull, do commits, all that kind of stuff. So now that we've done this, we also actually get to see the full file system in working copy. So we can hack with that package.swift that the editor doesn't show us. Yeah, no relation to hacking with Swift, but yeah, hacking with package.swift. It's very different, simple. So as your apps grow, you might want to split some functionality out into a library. So that's the first thing we're going to look at here. So what I'm doing is going into that package.swift, and if anyone's used Swift Package Manager for their dependencies, they know how this all works. You add in a library product, you add in a corresponding target, and then you add that as a dependency for your app. So that's all I've done there, and by setting up the file structure in the same way with the folders there, I've actually got a library that I can edit in Playgrounds. So you can do that. There's still no actual target selection in Playgrounds, so you do have to build your library by running the app. But you can push that to GitHub, and it all works for importing it in different projects. So we've also got here info.plists. You can add in an info.plist into your project. So you can see that here, and you might want to do that if you want to do things like if you insert this key into the info.plist, then that lets you say whether you've got encryption or not in your app. And for some reason, App Store Connect wants to ask you that every time you upload a build. So this just answers that question. So you then immediately, without any manual going in, get that test flight build ready. So this is something that I like to do with all of my projects that I'm building. So yeah, so quite a bit of functionality there. We've covered previews and running and some extra benefits like live refresh, app settings page, and you can do the easy test flight builds where you don't even have to set the version numbers. The build numbers, you just push it and go. The editor and its fancy customizable toolbars and bits, extensions through some smart use of OS functionality, and some hacking with that package.swift, so you can unlock the full power of Swift Package Manager projects. There's probably more you can do. That's as far as I've gone with it. But adding in packages and building them in Swift Playgrounds unlocks quite a lot of potential for modularizing apps and kind of scales up what you can actually do there. So there are some drawbacks to this. First one being breakpoints. Kind of handy for debugging when you run into a problem, but when you don't, you're fine. If you do run into a problem, you can still use print statements, and you get a console in the editor as well as the running app, so you can sort of see what you print out. But there's no way to sort of pause the app while it's running. So yeah, your mileage may vary with that one. Sometimes it can be handy to just open up in Xcode, the same project, and debug that way. There's also no support for targets, but as we've seen, we can build libraries in there still. One thing you might run into though, which is a bit disappointing, is you can't have targets for unit tests and UI tests. So if you like to test your code, which might be some of us, then you can't do that. You have to be a bit of a hacker here. There's no simulators, but I think that's probably the one that you're going to miss the least, because you can just run it in a window and you can resize that window. So you can actually sort of test at all different sizes that you would use on a phone as well as an iPad that way. So the only time you're actually going to miss that is when you're taking App Store Connect screenshots, which is a bit of a silly limitation. But they have actually updated recently, so I think you only need a iPhone Max screenshot and a 13-inch iPad Pro, and I happen to have one of them already. So just got to get that Max, I think, and then I wouldn't need the Mac at all. I think the biggest one though is the update schedule, and this is one where in the past it's been quite variable. There was 1 year where they released a Playgrounds beta right at the start in June, and that was great. You could get your apps updated for the new OS very easily and very quickly. But that's all they did. So that one test flight build just kind of lived there all summer. And test flight builds have an expiry date of about 3 months. So September came around, the new OSs came out, and that beta expired and they still hadn't released it. So all those projects that you've updated for the new iOS version, you had no editor for them. But other years, they've been fairly quick. It usually takes like a month or so for the update to come out. This year's been a bit different. There's still no update for iOS 18, and it's coming through to December, so I'm not quite sure what's going on there. But this is probably the one that will be the biggest sort of blocker to using this for anything without a Mac completely. I think you probably want to be able to update for the latest iOS releases if you're sort of looking to get in quick on any new features that come out. So yeah, so I think what's probably going to come is that this update schedule might be being held back by their learning example code that they've got in there, because they've got all these learning things and they have to update them for every major iOS version. And as we know, Swift 6 is kind of a big deal. So they might be taking their time updating that. So what would be good is breaking out this app editor into something a bit more like a Pro app. Could Xcode and iPad be coming? Maybe. So yeah, it might end up working a little differently to Xcode if it does, because we've got things like the requirement to upload to test flight to actually install the app, which so it might be actually a bit more security conscious than Xcode is. Stop you just downloading projects and running them, I guess, because who knows what you could be running. But yeah, I think another option might be that they open the sort of compiler end of it, maybe release a compiler kit that other apps can use that has some of these security concerns built in. But I guess we'll see. So to recap, yeah, an iPad is kind of a security-focused device, so you might run into some limitations there. But it's also quite a bit of a benefit for using it as sort of a main machine. And yeah, the fact that you can build apps on there is quite a good thing. I think they didn't need to include that upload to App Store Connect button, but the fact that they did kind of shows that they do want this to be a bit more than just a learning tool. They want it to be something you can actually use to build apps and put them onto the store. In terms of who might want to use Swift Playgrounds, I think definitely students and maybe even independent developers, I think, would probably have quite a good time with this. But if you're trying to pitch it to a business, I think the lack of unit tests and UI tests might be a bit of a problem. They probably are. It's going to be a hard sell to just drop all your tests. But yeah, I think it's definitely worth giving it a try. I think if you use your iPad for other things, this is definitely a workflow that can work now. So that's Playgrounds. Got one thing left to answer. Do I need a Mac? So we're seeing that we can actually build an app on the iPad. So let's kind of consider, what is a Mac then? When the iPad has Playgrounds, and it might actually get Xcode, they do seem like very similar sort of devices. The iPad's often kind of not regarded as a real computer when taking into account the OS, which can be a bit more locked down. But then the Mac also has some of those features, I think. So you kind of think that you can see the file system on Mac OS. You can see all the system files in there, but you've not been able to write to them for quite a long time. They're read-only, and they actually don't even exist. It's kind of telling you a lie when you look in Finder, because all of those system files are off in a separate partition. And it kind of just makes it look like you've got one consistent file system. So it's really just kind of the legacy support that's kind of holding the Mac to what you would typically regard as a typical computer. So then, do you have to look more widely for what the sort of definition of a traditional computer is? Would Android be more like that, with its ability to sort of root the device and do whatever you want, and you can still hook that up to a display, use it like that? But I think that's probably not a good measure, just the pure ability to sort of go in and even like change source code of an OS. Because if that's the definition, being able to root it, being able to take full control, then that smart fridge that you bought that runs Android is also a computer, which doesn't seem to make much sense. So yeah, you could even sort of say that, like, yeah, if using an open source operating system like Linux, surely if you can hook that up to a display, that's a computer. But there's one thing that can boot into Linux, and that's the Steam Deck. If you have that, you hook it to a display. Is that your computer now? It might be. And that's sort of a point, I guess, that we live in a sort of crazy world where we've got all these different types of computers, and they can all do different things. But it's more about sort of what workflows you can actually achieve on them that kind of determines whether that's the computer for you. So yeah, I think Apple definitely seems to think that more secure sort of OS is the way to go. They've recently introduced the Vision OS platform, which is based on iPadOS. So I think as we get new form factors, we're probably going to be looking at more sorts of OSs like that. And is everyone going to get a Mac just because it's got some of these things, when you can achieve your workflow of app development on an iPad? Might be less and less going forwards. But yeah, we'll see, I think. But certainly it's nice, it works for me. And yeah. So there's one sort of takeaway from this. If I'm using Playgrounds for all these sorts of things, you can build apps in it. Could your next laptop be an iPad? I think it's a bit of a question of, could your next laptop be secure? Could it fit into those security frameworks of iPadOS? And could you still get your work done with it? If you can, then could your next laptop be modular? Could you use it for all these different sort of use cases of using it for writing on, using it as just a tablet, using it as a desktop when you want to, using it as a gaming device even, clipping some controllers on the sides, or with just one device? Really would just mean, could your laptop be nice? The Mac, I don't know quite what's holding it back, but no touchscreen, no sort of removable display. It's technology from 20 years ago, really. It's got the performance, yes, but come on, let's have some exciting form factors. And that would be my presentation, but there is actually one more thing. So Playgrounds is just one IDE. What you tend to have on a definitive desktop sort of computer operating system is a whole ecosystem of IDEs, of Pro Tools, and we've shown some of Apple's ones, but what if there were more? So some of you might have heard of Godot. That's a game engine. You can download it, get an editor. It's got a load of built-in frameworks and its own sort of set of languages you can use for building your games. And that's on iPad. There's a test flight build that just came out earlier in the week, so you can actually install that on your iPad. It's pretty much the full editor of Godot on your iPad, and it's making use of all of the sort of iPad patterns for the UI. So that sort of made me think, this is just a couple of days before the talk, that maybe the real takeaway is that if you assume you can't, you'll never really succeed. But if you assume you can and work from there, then you can really just manage whatever you're setting out to do. So yeah, that's my talk. So,
any questions for James?
Yeah.
I thought it was a great talk, James. Nice. Your point there about possibly coding on your fridge made me laugh. Got me thinking, can we do this on other Apple devices? Could we do it on iPhone, on Vision Pro, for example?
Yeah, I think with iPhone it's an interesting one because Playgrounds, one thing that I didn't show is that it actually works with split view and slide over. And if it works in slide over, it works at sort of iPhone screen sizes. It's not great, but it can work at that, so it could certainly come to the phone. For Vision OS, I think it might take a bit more work, but I did have a look when I did get to try a Apple Vision Pro, and there is no Playgrounds app currently. So maybe they actually need to do a bit more on that side to get it working. But I think it's when you got the iPad version working, and Vision OS is based on iPadOS, it can't be too much work for the sort of potential win of having people just actually use this natively, getting 3D previews. That would be great. Just having the whole app rebuilt in 3D. So yeah, there's definite reason to do it, and maybe that's another reason why maybe the update this year is taking a while. Swift 6, Vision OS, all these things, maybe even Xcode. So yeah.
Nice, cool, thank you.
Any more?
Let's ask. You said you can't write or you can't run the unit tests. If
Yep.
you have edited the app in Xcode
Yep.
and written unit tests, is there something that if you take the unit tests to the iPad, can you run those tests at all?
Yeah, so there's no target picker. I think that's what you'll run into. So you can add more targets. You can add in the library target, you can add in a bunch more, but you can't actually select them to run. So that will be a limiting factor. And the only reason you can sort of develop libraries is that they can be a dependency of the app that is in the project. And so you kind of build them by virtue of that. But in terms of unit tests, one thing that I didn't actually mention is that what you do have in Playgrounds is previews. And if you think about unit tests, all they're doing is running some code and showing you the output. You could definitely use previews as an output for some tests. So you could actually have tests run in the file while you're doing the editing and live see whether it all passes or not. So that's something I've had a couple of goes at. I've got a couple of libraries, but I've never really used them seriously, so I'm not sure I'd recommend them. But yeah, it's something I'd like to see, that sort of thing. And I think it's possibly a missed opportunity of Swift testing that they didn't have like that live unit testing, because if they're off in a different target, you forget about them.
Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, one more.
So you mentioned that there aren't really simulators for Playgrounds.
Yeah.
So that means that when you run the app, you are just running on the iPad that you have.
Yeah.
So you can't do any testing of previous versions or what it would be on iOS, or you can't, for example, try like demo Vision Pro app like you could in Xcode with the.
Yeah, there is no support for building to external devices currently. It's just the iPad, and I think it's quite a nice thing that you can resize the window down to iPhone sizes, but Stage Manager doesn't actually let you resize to iPhone landscape, probably because a lot of iPhone apps don't support that. So that does mean that you still even kind of need an iPhone to demo that landscape if you support that. Yeah, another reason to have playgrounds on the Vision Pro, I think.
Just another follow-up to that then. So if it doesn't, so when you run, it doesn't install it on the iPad then?
No.
So does that mean it's not possible to do widgets and other kind of extensions like that? You can't really develop those?
So you can. My app, if you remember, I'm not going to try fiddling with the slides, but it actually supports multiple windows. And the way I achieve that is when you upload to App Store Connect, it can go into test flight, and that can actually install it to all of your devices that way. So it's a bit of a slower kind of loop for development, but you can actually install it to all your devices, see the result of a change, and then just push another build up when you fixed it. I think the limiting factor you'll have with widgets, though, is that's another case where you need another target. So anything that involves targets, any of those sorts of system extensions, you can't do, unfortunately. Yeah, any more?
Cool. Slido, but I have a question.
Yeah.
What's the largest Swift Playgrounds project you've worked on, and how fast does it compile and get to previewing? Because Xcode is often not the quickest.
Yeah.
Big project.
That is an interesting one. I could just try it now, actually. I think the biggest one that I've got is probably my that Medley app, which is for iTunes kind of use cases.
Don't think you're mirroring anymore, James.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
Yeah. So I've loaded it up now. It's building. Yeah, it does take a while. I think maybe I've managed to make quite a big project, and it's done. Yeah. Yeah. So I think it is kind of, it's still the Swift compiler that it uses, and it's running on an M4. So it probably takes the same amount of time in Xcode. But I've not really done a direct comparison, and it wouldn't really be fair because my MacBook is a MacBook Air with the M1. So that is slower.
I guess the reason I ask is that you describe the app previews as almost instantaneous.
Yeah.
They're anything but instantaneous in Xcode. So I just wondered if that was
Yeah.
kind of like a build system thing that's just generally better on the iPad. Maybe.
I think that's an interesting one. I think definitely with work projects, I've had a lot of sort of trouble with previews where you need to be very careful about what targets you're in when you run them. It has to be sort of the right sort of target that the view lives in a lot of the time. I think probably one thing that might help is that there is a sort of tendency to just make everything in one project because you don't support sort of libraries natively. So you're kind of not having to deal with too much of a dependency tree. And that probably helps. Certainly all of the apps that I make for myself, even when I was using Xcode, I didn't have too much trouble with previews. And I know as well that was the first build, whereas when you're doing a sort of refresh build, it tends to be a bit quicker.
Some from Slido. Can you import IPAs to upload via App Store Connect?
You can't import an IPA to upload in that sort of sense. It has to actually be through that app settings page and then do an upload to App Store Connect. And what that does is it builds your project and then uploads it, basically. So, yeah, it kind of doesn't really give you an avenue to sort of inject anything in there. I think as well, I've heard that it doesn't support Swift Package Manager binary targets. So if you want to sort of inject any code that way, that might not work. There are some kind of sort of edge case limitations of the compiler, but for the most part, it's just the Swift compiler straight from Xcode. You can't build Objective-C, but most things should work.
Next question. What is the minimum iOS version / recommended iPad models for development?
Yeah. So this was introduced in iOS 15, so I reckon you could probably, any device that supports iOS 15, you could use that for development. Kind of don't have too much trouble in terms of build times, but then I do like my iPads and I do update fairly frequently. I've not tried an older iPad for builds, so I don't know how that would perform, but they have been using the M series chips, so you could probably compare it to how it would run on the corresponding Mac. And before that, they were using Intel, and the iPads and iPhones even were running quicker than those Intel Macs. Direct comparison of iMovie exports, the iPhones are actually exporting quicker than the Mac with the last sort of Intel chips they were using. So you're probably going to be all right if you just consider it as an Apple Silicon Mac from that same time period. for your decisions.
Last question then, on Slido.
Yep.
How long did it take you to create the shortcuts? And do you have any tips for working with long shortcuts with lots of branching logic?
Yeah, right, so in terms of how long it took me to build the shortcut, I think it started out simpler. I've iterated on it a bit as I went into things like default values and especially closures. Closures are a fiddly one because you need to add the at escaping, and then view builders, you need to copy the thing across, but it does support all of them now. I don't know, I used a lot of regex tools and things to help me out, but yeah, I think in terms of longer shortcuts, have a bigger screen. That helps. Don't try to do it on the phone. But yeah, if you have a bigger screen, then you can kind of get away with it. You can also split your shortcuts down into different shortcuts. I use that sometimes, although not quite so much anymore, as it's just easier to edit everything in one. But yeah, try to keep your shortcuts fairly simple, and you can sort of use them as subroutines as well, using the output, using the one shortcut action. Yeah.
What regex tool are you using in America?
Oh, just one of the web ones, like the first thing that comes up when I search regex validator. Yeah.
ChatGPT is very good for regex.
Yeah.
But even less reason to learn how a regular expression actually works now.
Yeah. Yeah, and also just a bit of trial and error.
This might be a stupid question. I'm
Yep.
not the most techie person in the world. Can an iPad support multiple screens at the same time? Is that something it can do? Well, it literally is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I've got a different thing on my iPad screen to this one at the moment.
Question, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, actually, it kind of supports 2 mode. If you've got Stage Manager one, you can either mirror the traditional way, or you can use Stage Manager. Doesn't work if you're doing it over the air, though. If you're doing it to a TV or something, unfortunately, I can't use the TV as a second screen. Yeah, unless it's wired like that.
Sort of relate to that. Can you describe your setup then at home? Is it this plus a monitor and a mouse and keyboard basically?
Yeah, pretty much. So I've got a Magic Mouse, and I've got the Magic Keyboard as well. I'm not using the one with the Touch ID, and I know that doesn't work on the iPad anyway. They've kind of just built it for Macs. But yeah, I've just got those two, and then I've got a 4K display, 24-inch one. It's the LG Ultrafine, which was one that I think was made in collaboration with Apple potentially, because it switches on automatically when you plug it in, which is quite handy. And it's also got a whole load of USB-C ports on the back, so I've just gone USB-C everything. And it means I never have to worry about the fact it's only got one port, because I just plug it in, it charges, it outputs to display immediately, and then everything that's plugged in connects to it.
And you use it in like clamshell mode, and would you want to?
You can't, unfortunately. They've not set up a system. I guess the Magic Keyboard for iPad is optional, so you can just sort of take it off. But yeah, it's always going to display as a second screen. There are some limitations on it still, like you can't bring up Control Center on the external display, which I don't know why exactly, but I guess if you do the brightness slider, that's just going to control the internal one. You have to go into settings, but with the LG Ultrafine, at least you can go into settings and adjust the brightness in settings. So yeah, it's a bit kind of, Stage Manager seems like the first take, and they've not really iterated on it much since. But yeah, it works pretty well in my experience.
What's the most frustrating thing for you? Because you're the most pro iPad person I think I've ever met. But surely there must be something frustrating which you think, I wish this could do this, and my Mac can.
So yeah, work one day without running into a bug. I think it's iPadOS is its most buggy it's ever been. With iPadOS 18, it's like sometimes when I'm using the external display, it will think it's 90 degrees off, or the cursor will get trapped on the external display, or sometimes you click on a window and it just rejects focus. I've been running into quite a bit of that, and I'm filing feedback, but I'm not quite sure what's happening this year because not a lot of it's getting addressed. And they've not really changed Stage Manager, so I don't know why it's breaking. But
So it's gotten buggier, is that what you're saying? Oh, right, okay.
yeah. Though, yeah, I've been hearing some bugs on iOS as well, maybe. So quality control at Apple is needed. Yeah, but I mean, for the most part, it does work well. It's nice being able to just use my main device, so I still do use it for most stuff. But yeah, like I do run into quite a bit of this, and it's a bit frustrating. But otherwise, I mean, yeah, everything works, and you can do all of this stuff that I've shown. It's just sometimes those bugs can be a bit of a pain.
On macOS is not bug free either.
Yeah. Well, yeah. When I was sharing to you for the run through, I pressed stop screen sharing and it just wouldn't. So yeah, you get these sorts of bugs all over the place at the minute.
Fantastic. Any other questions, James? Okay, let's give it a round of applause. Thank you very much.